I'm bitterly disappointed.
Bud Moore just has better hair than you.
It's not right. I've done so much for this sport. And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to today's Rowdy.com Big Three, talking Hall of Fame from two guys who didn't get in this year, doggone it, Buzz Cutler Bassmasters, but we're still classy enough to come on by and talk about it.
I did get on 43% of the ballots, though, so I was this close, Bud Moore.
Oh, man, the heartbreak.
There were some surprises yesterday.
There were some surprises.
David Pearson, Lee Petty, not so surprising.
Yes.
Bobby Allison, a little bit surprising. Ned Jarrett, Bud Moore, pretty damn surprising.
Pretty surprising, just because you look at, I think, the numbers. When you look at the numbers, you think Cale Yarborough. You think 3 championships. You think Darrell Waltrip, 3 championships. You think Dale Inman, 8 championships as a crew chief. But obviously, what the voters thought about went beyond the numbers, went beyond just the competitive environment. When you talk about Bud Moore and the road he paved at the beginning of the sport before the Sprint Cup Series, what we now call the Sprint Cup Series, even started back in modifieds, back at the founding of NASCAR. You think about Ned Jarrett and not only 2 championships as a driver on the track, but also his work as a pioneering broadcaster, a voice that we all grew up with. You know, we only ran 9 seasons, Cutler. I mean, so I think that was the lesson here. Some of the pioneers and some off-track things contributing to the history of NASCAR, more than just purely competitive accomplishments.
When I asked Doug Rice why he voted for Bobby Allison over Cale Yarborough, his response was Bobby Allison contributed more to the sport overall. And Dustin Long said in his blog that Richard Petty actually stood up in the meeting of the voters panel and said, don't just look at championships, look at the fact that Allison ran 500 races a year, often 2 in one day, and served as an ambassador for this sport. Cale Yarborough, great champion, great competitor, but is enjoying a quiet retirement on his farm, doesn't even show up to NASCAR events unless he gets paid. So obviously that does
Man's got to eat, Cutler.
I don't fault Cale Yarborough. Don't get me wrong. I am in no way faulting him. The man deserves to get paid.
But there's also this dynamic. There's more guys that are Hall of Famers, guys and gals, than there are spots available in any given year. So you're going to snub someone who deserves to be in by definition.
Well, let's say issue number 2 is, should we take off-track accomplishments? Should we take Cale Yarborough's personality into account? Should we take personal relationships between the voters and the votees into account? Is that appropriate?
I don't know about personal relationships. I think you can't help it. It's a human endeavor. If you know a guy, you feel a certain way about him. I will say this. I think greatness comes in different ways. Greatness comes in different ways. A lot of people this week on Rowdy.com have been talking about Richard Petty's 200 wins and saying, well, it wasn't that competitive back then, and there were a lot of races that weren't that long, and this and that. But the commitment that Richard Petty had to make and the challenges he had to overcome were different. The guys today, just showing up is the easy part. But back in the day, just showing up may have been the hard part. And showing up for all those races, you talk about Allison running all those regional races. I mean, that was a serious commitment to this sport, and that was a challenge, and maybe that's what made these guys great, some of the things they were able to do. So I think taking off-track stuff into account is certainly appropriate.
Well, it's also appropriate when you look at a guy like Bud Moore, one of 2 gentlemen who's still alive who was in the Streamline Hotel when they had the infamous meeting that started NASCAR. Mechanics, crew chiefs working in the garage today that were trained by Bud Moore. It's hard to quantify that sort of a contribution, and I think it's no less valid than 3 championships. Do I think Bud Moore deserved to get in before Cale Yarborough? I don't know, but
I think that's what's hard is you don't know.
But
you might have voted differently. I mean, I probably would have voted differently.
I probably would have voted differently, but can you make the argument that Bud Moore's contributions have reverberated throughout this sport in a greater way than Cale Yarborough's? Yes, you can make that argument.
I agree, and that's the other thing. As we were in the room hearing all the points of view, we didn't have a chance to go, I never thought of it that way.
Right. Right.
Issue number 3.
Issue number 3, I mean, I don't want to pick on Bud Moore, but he did get less than 50% of the vote.
Yeah.
Should a guy get in if at least half the voters don't think he's deserving of getting in?
Well, you have to bear in mind, as I think you may have pointed out, or we may have pointed out on our podcast today, there aren't a tremendous number of voters here.
Yeah, it's different than baseball where you have hundreds of riders across the country.
53 votes we're essentially tallying here, but it does make you wonder if maybe the vote got split between, say, Cale Yarborough and Darrell Waltrip.
Did they cancel each other out?
Did people sort of vote for one or the other? in that case, if they had to choose, if it were kind of cut down once and then you have to choose, or you have to get 50 or 60% to get in, and so the guys who cross that threshold are in, now let's revote to see if someone else can cross that threshold to get to the 5, if you might not have had a different class. And
I like
it's an
that
interesting
system.
idea.
I like that system.
Create a threshold, and you got to get a certain percentage of the voters, and if you get 3 guys in on the first ballot, then you take those guys off and you vote again to see that someone doesn't split the vote, and maybe you have a guy that most voters would have preferred than the guy who ends up getting in the class. But really, we're splitting hairs because these are 5 Hall of Famers. They deserve to be in the Hall, and there's Hall of Famers who aren't in the Hall yet who will be in the Hall. Next year's class is going to be Dale Inman, Darrell Waltrip, Cale Yarbrough. I mean, the guys that we felt were snubbed this year, just like David Pearson last year, we felt he should have been in. He was a lock this year. Some of those guys are going to be in next year.
Big time surprises this year, guys that perhaps I wouldn't have voted for, you wouldn't have voted for, but you can't quibble
Absolutely
with the
not.
fact that they're in there.
And I think in a way, kudos to the voters for taking more than just the competitive aspects into account. They look beyond that, and I think that's probably appropriate. All right, that's been your Rowdy.com Big 3 for today. You and I have to get to the racetrack, see what's going on out there on a rainy Thursday.
We're going to go racing in the rain.
Yeah, or walking around in the rain or something. But I ain't holding your hand.
Ooh, I love hanging in the rain.
No.
The girl I love.
Nope.
Rowdy.com. Say it like it is.
Say what like it is?
Rowdy.com.